If you have said to yourself, I should write that, or if someone has said to you, you should write that, then I'm talking to you because you need to write. And that's why you're tuned in to yWrite. Today's episode is brought to you by the law offices of Rafer Pellegrino. With a reputation for results for over 25 years, Rafer sets to achieve positive results for all of his clients. He and his team support the best possible settlement in order for you to get your life back. Consulting with investigators, medical experts, forensic scientists, and more, he builds your case to win for you. Rafer Pellegrino for the win. Hi, I'm Angela Grout, and welcome to yWrite. This is a program filled with conversations about writing with writers to help you write. Have you thought, I should write this story down? Or has someone said to you, you should write that? Then I'm talking to you. So tune in to yWrite today, and you're going to find out about writing. Now, I'm an author. I have published 3 books, self-published, so I know the journey it takes to sit down, write a book, and then go through all of the processing of editing, proofreading, formatting, getting a publisher, getting your actual book in your hand, marketing that book, and then, of course, going off on book talks to talk about your book. Today on yWrite, we're going to talk to someone who also has written a book. However, her and I have many types of writing that we share. So I would like to introduce my guest. Now, she is a Dominican playwright from Springfield, Massachusetts. She's an advocate for people with disabilities, and she has a passion that inspired the creation of the Arts Project, which helps people with physical and intellectual disabilities. Her first play was produced at the Majestic Theater, and all of her succeeding plays, including The Building, have been produced in Western Massachusetts. She has hosted her own cable network show program called Simply Talking for over 5 years. She is a mother of 2 like me. She's a community activist and a theater maker. And she is the author of Buried Beneath the Words. This is my friend, fellow author and playwright, Betel Arnold.
Hello, Angela.
Hi, Betel. Thank you so much for joining me today on yWrite.
Hi. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you.
I'm so happy to be here. I have to say, before my other 3 kids say, Mom, you left us out, we have 5 kids.
Oh my gosh, I do know you have 5 kids. I have 2 kids. She has 5 kids. Yes, 5 kids.
5, yes.
Yeah, juggling 5 kids and writing. So before I ask you how you got into writing, because I think that's a fabulous story that our listeners need to hear. But I want to talk a little bit about how we met.
Okay.
So from, my recollection
is,
when I was writing April Rain, I was searching to figure out how to put more dialogue into the story. So I saw that there was a playwriting class at the Springfield Museum in Springfield, Massachusetts, and Danny Eaton, who owns the Majestic Theater, was teaching this class. So I went in to learn how to make dialogue, and writing plays obviously gets you a lot of dialogue because you're not really describing scenery. You're having a conversation with your characters and letting them tell the story.
Right.
So Danny, after I had written the play for April Rain, had invited me to shadow him during his production of his Walt Whipple show at the Majestic Theater on the campus where he does his rehearsals, Baldwin Street. Mm-hmm. And I remember walking in, and I don't know anybody, and there you are sitting there, and you're like, come sit next to me. Okay. So we sat, and you also were shadowing him that day. However, he had already produced one of your scripts that you also developed in this playwriting class. How did you meet Dan?
Well, he was actually given a workshop, as you said.
Yes, a workshop, yes.
Yes, at the Springfield Museums. Mm-hmm. And I began that play while I was in school taking a playwriting class. I had to fulfill a 3-credit requirement. But because of family circumstances, I was unable to finish the course. And I'm thinking, well, I need to figure out how to write this play because I knew nothing about playwriting besides taking how to write a 10-minute play.
And this was your very first play?
Yes. Yes. And my very first play called Tight Pants came out of that 10 how to write a a play in 10 minutes. I mean, a 10-minute playwriting class, and the teacher there, Hillary, said to me, well, maybe I think you should take this 10-minute play and turn it into a whole play. And so from there, I was unable to fulfill that course requirement, and I took the workshop at the Springfield Museums. And that's where I met Danny. And I have to say, I'm so glad for Danny Eaton, because
he's amazing.
He really is. And I think one of the things that I really appreciate about him is that he allows the playwright to get involved in every part of the process, and that is so awesome. Like he said to you, why don't you come and shadow me?
Shadow me, see how it's done. And I remember being at a rehearsal, and the actress for Walt Whipple, she was doing a scene where she had to like lift up her skirt and show like her stockings, because there was a scene about what happened to her stockings, and he, said cut, like he wanted to stop. And then he wrote her a note and he gave it to someone who brought it up to her on stage. And they took like their little 5-minute equity break, because, we have equity actors on the set. And, I said to him, I go, so what did you write to her? And he goes, I'm asking her to do something a little bit different. You'll see it in the next scene. So I'm like, oh, okay. So she comes back out and she performs it again in a completely different attitude, different body language. I mean, it was, and all he did was like write her this little note. And I go, so as a writer, when you're producing a play, do you have the rights, to say to the actors, like, oh, I want you to try it this way instead? And he said, well, I'm the writer, the director, the producer. And I was like, oh, so you have all those rights. He goes, if you're working, usually you leave that to the director.
Yes. And that is something that I think is so important to have faith in the director as a writer, as a playwright. I think that is something that I'm still navigating. Of course, when we first began with our project Type Hands, Danny Eaton is somebody that is, seasoned, and he's been in the business so long that he knows. So I had a lot of trust in what he was doing anyways. And I think the director does have, he's the one that tells them how to do it. And of course you're there. And if there's maybe something in the dialogue that doesn't sound right, then you can let the director know that you want to change something. And that was my first experience.
But since then, you've worked with other directors.
And not all directors are, it's I think that's the difference between writing a novel or writing a novella or anything like that, is that you're learning to navigate. It's a collaborative effort, right? You're in touch with the set designers, with the stage managers, with the directors. So it's very collaborative.
Yeah, I've sat in Danny's theater and like sketched out what I thought the scenery would look like, and said, do you think this could be done? And and it's really neat to get involved in those things, but not. But also knowing you can trust someone to build that set, or to direct. And and I've had really good luck with working with directors that I collaborate well with. This past summer I was at the International Women's Writers Guild, and I had one of my 10-minute plays produced. And like my first one was April Rain, which I was trying to do that like 10-minute play, because Danny was focusing on like doing the 10-minute, but he also knew that what my vision was with April Rain. And his plays, he likes to have 5 to 7 characters on stage, wants that happy ending, that feel good. And and I love that, going to a show to see that. But April Rain was more of that murder mystery, and I have like 27 characters. So trying to whittle that down, I got it down to like 9, but it was still he's like, this is more of a movie. I go, yes, that's what I see. So when I did a play at the International Women's Writers Group, it was called COVID Times. It's like a little silly play about COVID, and I had 6 characters. And the director was like, you need to have 3. It's got to be 10 minutes and you need 3 characters. And I'm like,
so how did you do with that?
So I whittled it down to 5 characters. And I said, I have 5 characters. And she's like, 3. And I said, well, what if I combined one of my characters into, 2 people into one, and then I have 4 characters? She's like, well, I really want you to have 3. I go, but the 4th character is minor, but it's major at the end. Like, you just need it. So she let it go, and it was great. And we had this one scene where time passes, like, a whole year passes. It was COVID times, and, we were trying to figure out how in 10 minutes to show like a year passed. And, we couldn't have props right then. And so I was really struggling with it. And I said, I don't know how to do this. So during the rehearsal, this is when I saw directors are brilliant. She goes, I want all the characters on stage to just walk in a circle together really slow and then face the audience and then start your dialogue. And it was like magic.
Oh, really?
Like everything, like their dialogue went, they stopped. And then, as the audience, you're like, what's going on? And then they slowly walked in the circle and then continued, and you totally got it. They were like, look at what happened last year. And you understood, where you were in the setting.
Right.
And I looked at her, I go, you're brilliant. Like that one little thing. And then, like we were talking about earlier, how it's difficult working with the different personalities of all the actors and things. And of all of the stuff in that play, the one thing one of the actors kept getting stuck on was how to turn. She's like, which way do you want me to turn? I don't understand. And we're like practicing this, and I'm like, you turn right and then back and then left. And I'm thinking, that's what you're stuck on? Like with all this dialogue, they're fine, memorizing their lines.
Yeah.
But, again, 10-minute play versus a full-length play. I mean, it's a lot on acting, for the actors, for the directors, and for the writer.
Yeah. Well, what I find is like, all directors are different, and they see the vision, they carry the vision of, what their vision is for something that you've written. And I think that as a playwright, especially if it's your first play, I think it's also important to, like you said, the director said she wanted 3 characters.
Yeah.
I think sometimes you have to, it depends on the story, right? And what's really, really important and what you're going to advocate, because, it's your story.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is a story that I'm trying to tell. Of course, the theater always says whether they want to produce it or not produce it. And it's such a great thing when somebody says, yeah, we would like to bring this play to the stage. That's a wonderful feeling. I also found in the process that there's times that you have to advocate to say, no, this is how I really see this ending.
Yes.
Or this is, how, there's an integrity to how you want to tell a story as well. So there's always that balancing, and it's navigating that, because, like I said, there's when you're doing a play, there's so many different people that are involved in that process. It's not just, you're like. So
when you're writing your play and, they've come to you and said, okay, I want to produce this play, like, let's, give it the green light. Do you provide the actors with like backstories of the characters?
I think, honestly, every situation is different.
Okay.
And because for me, I've had Taipans produced at the Majestic, and then I did a 24-hour where the play had to be, it was a 10-minute play, and it had to be written and produced within 24 hours.
Wow.
So that was, where we got a prompt, and I had to write it overnight.
So you were given a prompt. So
I was given a prompt, and I did not know anything about the actors besides how, certain things about them, like their shoe size or how tall they were. And that's all I was given. And I was given 5 characters, and I was given a prompt. It is finished. Wow. And I had to go home and how many actors I was going to have. So just by looking at how tall they were, and it was challenging, but I have to tell you something, that it challenged even the way that I thought about writing, because up to that point, I thought I can only write in the morning. I can only write in the morning. And I found when I was given that challenge that I had to go home and write at night, because I got that prompt, I believe it was at 7 p.m.
Oh, wow.
And then,
and the show was going to be at 7 p.m. the next night?
And it was going to be, yes. And of course, I had to hand it over in the morning to the director and the actors, and then they had to take what I had written and then bring it to life, give it life. So it challenged my own way of thinking that I can only write during the day.
Is that your writing schedule? Like, do you, like the great masters, they have their writing schedules of saying, oh, you have to write 1,000 words a day, or 3 pages, or 2 hours. It has to be at these times, and everybody has their own way to write. Do you have a specific schedule that you stick with?
I always, like you said, you read people that have been very successful at writing, and you try to implement their schedule. I remember reading, I'm not exactly who said it, that they wrote 1,000 words a day.
Yeah.
And I began to try to do that. And I was so stressed about it, trying to get to that 1,000 words. I really, personally, I feel that everybody has to look at their life and really see what works for them. Because when you're trying to incorporate what worked for somebody else into how you're going to do it, maybe your life is not conducive to that. Yeah. Personally, I have 5 children, and one of my son is a child with special needs, and his needs are great. So I could not really stick to a schedule. When I try to stick to a writing schedule and then it doesn't happen, then it can be discouraging.
Oh, it's so discouraging.
Yeah. Because you're like,
you have the intent and you're like, oh, I didn't get to it today.
Exactly. I'm going to write for 3 hours or 2 hours. I'm going to get up at 5 in the morning. But then you find that you had a family situation and you didn't go to bed till 2 in the morning.
Prioritize your life. You have to. And you want to prioritize the writing, but life trumps it.
Exactly. So what I found that works for me is, honestly, not to be such a stickler for the schedule, and to understand that my life is different and that I have a big family and my family is my priority. Writing is something that's important to me. So I will try to get up in the morning and write. But also there are times that I have to tell my family, you know what, I need to go away for a few days or, a weekend and go somewhere and write.
Yeah.
So I've had to do that. So basically what I'm saying is, if you can get up in the morning, for me, mornings are better. So if I can get up early in the morning and write, that's what I prefer to do. But I'm holding on to that loosely.
Yeah, you have to adjust. I mean, I personally, when I started writing, it was because I was like the bored mom at home.
Yes, you told me that.
I was working full time at the flower shop all day long, and then I come home and the mom hat goes on, and then my husband goes out the door to, go play hockey or whatever he gets to do for his outdoor, outside of the house extracurricular activities. And I'm home with, 2 children, and I'm saying I want a hobby. And I love to read. And that's when I was like, you know what, I'm going to, I'm journalizing anyways. Let me try to, work this into some sort of writing and make a book out of it. And, writing at night when the kids were in bed, helped me, gave me a hobby, and it kind of gave me that structure. And joining a writer's group, which took me many years to do because, you write, I write in the closet, not sharing because you're afraid of what people will think. When I joined the Springfield Writers Museum, Creative Writers Group, 3 hours every Thursday.
That's when you would write?
Dedicated time. I still wrote every night, but dedicated time. And I loved the writing program that Teresa Chamberlain, who will be on the show soon, that she constructed, because we would go in and do a 10-minute prompt, which sometimes would just clear my head. There's a famous author somewhere that said this. I can't remember who right now. But, it's sometimes just getting all the minutia out of your head and onto paper clears the way for what needs to come out.
It definitely does.
And it's okay, let me just for 10 minutes spew whatever I need to spew, even if it's the to-do list of what I need to get done later in the day. Now that's out of the way, and then I can focus in on. And their program, you can write by a prompt. They will give you prompts if you need it. But, for me, when I was working on, my book, Dear Baby, Get Out, I knew what chapters I wanted to get done. So I was like, okay, today I'm writing this chapter. And, actually, it wasn't Dear Baby, Get Out. It was my next book, Bean, that I was working on. And, just saying, okay, I'm going to write this. And then, rough draft, it's done. And then go from there. So at least you get it out on paper. Because when it's in here.
Yes. Crowded.
It's really crowded. And there's something to be said, and I know you'll agree with me, when I had my first play at the table read, there was something amazing about hearing your characters outside of your head. I could breathe. It was oh, yes, thank you for giving it a voice. Yes, thank you for giving it a voice. Because then you see how the characters work together. Because when they're in here and you're trying to sort all of that out, you can feel crazy.
Yes, it's so great. It was such a great experience to actually hear, an actor, because they're amazing, to bring to life something that you're, all by yourself in a little room and you're writing a line, and all of a sudden to hear an actor say it, it's so amazing when that happens.
Danny had one of his actors, I did a monologue workshop with him and shared a monologue on one of the actors who's probably in his 40s read it, and the monologue was for a little boy. And when he read it, it just took on a whole new life.
Yes.
Because it was the little boy in an adult body, like telling his story.
Interesting.
And I just sat there, like, sit back, and I'm watching him like, wow, thank you, you know?
Yes.
Like, and it, for me, it developed into something more than what I even thought it was.
Yeah, yeah. You know, one of the things that, knowing you personally, I think in writing, I think determination is really important.
Yeah.
And also having a deadline.
Yeah, deadline.
Deadlines, believe it or not, really help. And this last play, The Building, that is having a reading at the Silverthorne Theater Company. You know, when I was halfway through it, a part of me almost felt as though, oh, you know, I don't know that I want to finish this, because I was, it was a difficult play for me to write. And, but because they decided to do a reading of it, it kind of forced me to finish it. And I was so glad that I did finish it. I think it's important, even if it's not something that you feel that might be the greatest, but still finishing it.
You're accomplished.
You're still bringing an end to it.
And I found, like, I'll set my own deadlines, but because I'm not, I don't know if it's because I'm not paying myself or because I'm not hired, like, I will postpone it sometimes. Because life does get in the way.
Exactly.
And, you know, here I kept saying, okay, Iperine's going to be a movie by 2022. I mean, it's 2023. Granted, we had 2 years of a pandemic and, you know, other extenuating circumstances. But I'm just like, okay, I have, you know, my writing lists of what stories are on deck to do. And I put little deadlines when I want them done by. But, again, I'm sitting there going, Angela, think of your deadline. Think of the deadline.
Yes.
And even doing like a show like this is great because it does give me, you know, a deadline to say, okay, I'm going to accomplish this today. Yes, I did it. And even talking about some of the projects I'm working on, and if I talk about it on the air like this, like, okay, you better follow through with that. And as a florist, like, I had, you know, brides and grieving families come, and they're like, you know, we need this done. And I've never missed a deadline. You know, I mean, you get it done. And I'm like, I now need to treat my writing like I did those bridal folders, you know? Because the bride comes in and tells me everything she wants, and I'm taking all these notes. Yeah. And I file it away until it gets closer to the wedding, and then all of a sudden, D-Day's coming, and it's like, you got to do it. Yeah. So now, you know, that's how I'm starting to treat some of my writing projects now that I'm not, you know, working at the flower shop.
Well, I think that that's important, and I think that that's what distinguishes somebody that is going to, you know, be successful. And when I say successful, I find that I'm successful when I finish something, you know, because whether, I mean, that's me. Everybody is different. But whether it goes anywhere or it doesn't, it's like a personal accomplishment. It's like, okay, I finished it. And that gives me such a great feeling to know that I was able to see it through. And I think for what I was saying was that determination is something that's so important in anything that you do. Because if you have the determination to finish something, I think that you will be successful at it. And having people around you, having the right people around
that support you.
Yes, because there are times, especially in writing, where you can become so discouraged. You know, you're maybe stumped, or you're feeling like this writing is not any good, or whatever. And then having people that are really supportive. That are honest but supportive.
One of the reasons I ended up publishing An Angel's Journey, my first book, was because of the people around me were saying, what are you going to do with that story? Like, because I had shared it with them verbally, or they had read it, and I'm like, I don't know. I go, I wrote it. I mean, I think I understood the message, you know, because you do sometimes find your own message in these stories. And, you know, but then I was having some friends say, you know, I have a friend who, you know, has no faith right now. She's going through something. You know, could I let her read it? And that's when I was like, oh, they want to share it with someone. Like, yeah, I mean, sure. So I'm sending them the PDF file, you know, saying, here you go. I mean, you know, it's 200 pages. Is she really reading it on that? And that's when I was like, you know, I guess I could, you know, at least look into publishing it. So it's like, you know, when you have those people around you encouraging you and, you're like, oh yeah, I guess I could do that.
And then also having people that, for example, if I give it to a friend, she might be like, oh yeah, I really liked it. But what you really need also to add to that is people that are, really know about writing, and that they can say, okay, I was confused about this part.
100%.
Because clarity is so important. And the last thing that you want to do is give somebody a book and they're like, oh, I just don't know. I was confused. When they tell you that they're confused or didn't understand, by their questions, what do I have to, where do I have to clarify?
And playwriting helped me with that, because it's like, if you're going to introduce something into a scene, you need to have a reason. Because otherwise you're like, well, why did that guy walk in the room right now? Like, why are you telling me about this character when nothing's happening? Or you're bringing up something that, especially my editors would say, like, why, what's so important about this guy right now? Or who is he? Tell me more about him, where he really didn't come into play until chapter 5, but I realize I have to bring that story, into chapter 3.
It's so different, right? Because when you're doing a play, it has to be very condensed.
Very condensed.
When you have a novel, it's like you have it's so many words.
Yes.
And you can do the backstory, you can do this. So doing a play forces you to say, okay, well, you have to be very very careful with your word choices and really understanding the characters. And anytime you're going to introduce something, you have to tie all the loose ends.
Right. And in a book, you're like describing how the character says something, but in a play,
no,
you don't have to describe how the character's saying it. I mean, the actor knows those things. Your book, Buried Beneath the Words, I loved this book. I mean, in your subtitle, The Young Woman's Journey of Embracing God's Word and Finding Her True Self.
Yes.
And, just that really spoke to me, because we all are seeking God's, words and guidance, at least I am, and, wanting to follow my true path. But I love, like, the title, because I think it's so important for all readers and writers, because when someone reads your book, you don't know how they're going to take it in, even when they see their play. And a lot of times, I know even for me, buried beneath the words in your story is my story.
Really?
Do you know what I mean? Like, because it's like I can see beyond the words to relate it to myself. And I think that's how a lot of people do read. The characters in my book, Dear Baby Get Out's about childbirth. You're going to read it, and, as a mother of 5, you're going to relate your own story in that scene. And, the scene where, the doctor's giving the epidural, like, you put yourself in that scene, so you experience it, and it tells your own story. And in every story, there's the story that is buried beneath the words, and I loved that. And even, like, in the story when you were talking about, people listening to God's voice and following, not necessarily, it is what their heart wants, but what they know their calling is, and being able to share that. Sometimes it is hard to get it out in words. And when you're trying to share, you need to read between the lines.
It's so interesting about that book, because the way, and I want to say, for anybody that's interested in writing or why write, I think it's important. I was not the person that knew since the age of 6 that they wanted to write. In my early years, I was a reader. I loved to read, but that fell off because of, everybody's upbringing is so different. That fell off when my life just took a turn and I stopped reading. But I remember being a mother of 5, and I stopped working to take care of my son with special needs, and I had my daughter, who was 5, was at home, and I was just trying to keep the kids busy. And I told my daughter started drawing a picture, and she drew this picture and she colored the buildings purple. And I looked at that picture and I said, Jordan, who lives in those buildings? She said, I don't know. And I said, as a way to keep her busy, I said, why don't we sit at the computer and write a story about who lives in the buildings? And we sat down at the computer, and I quickly realized that I was trying to control the story.
Yeah.
She's 5 years old.
Kids have imagination.
Yes. And I'm like trying to bring the story in a different direction, and she lost interest. And 5 years later, I found that story in the computer. And I said, I wonder how this story ends. And at that time, I was, I decided to take a class to try to tell that story that I began with my daughter when she was 5 years old.
Wow.
And that is how I embarked on the writing journey.
So you never wrote really before that? You weren't making up stories and writing them down?
I found writing to be really intimidating, very intimidating. And the last thing that I thought that I would be doing was writing. Yeah. And the only reason I began to write was because my daughter drew that picture. And I wanted to finish telling that story to give it to my daughter, to say, look, Jordan, when you were 5, you painted this picture.
Did you?
So I still have not finished that story.
So Molly wrote a story when she was 7. And I am working and getting it into a children's book now. It's been on the back burner, but it's been on that bucket list, got to do. Yes. And it's literally so close to being done. I've had it uploaded in Amazon for 3 years and kind of walked away from it. Yes. So we hired an illustrator from DC Comics to do the illustrations. I hired someone from Marvel Comics to color it in. So, I mean, all the pages are done. The story's done. But she would see me write all the time. And, we went to the park one day, and she's playing with her friends, and I'm sitting on the picnic blanket, and I'm working on my story.
Right.
And, I was doing editing at that point. So, I have my copies from the, people who had edited, and I'm changing it into my computer. And, she came over afterwards, and she goes, Mom, we should write a story about today. And I'm like, okay. I took out a scrap piece of paper, and she's telling me all about her day. And I wrote it all down. I saw that little piece of paper. And it's so true. Like, just a little spark of an idea like that, like your daughter saying, oh, this is the building, and this person lives here, and this person lives here. Right. And seeing that childlike imagination as an adult helps you to understand why we write.
Well, I actually just took over the story, and it's not a children's story. It turned into something totally different.
Is it this play?
No, it isn't.
Oh, because this play is called The Building, so I didn't know if it had to do with the purple building.
Well, no, it was about the building, so I called that story Jordan City, because her name is Jordan. And so that is the working title of that novel that I do have a draft of. Oh. But because I knew nothing about writing, I started taking classes, and that's how I embarked on, I took that how to write a 10-minute play, and then it took me in the direction of playwriting. So then it was like, oh my gosh, this play that I wrote, Taipans, Danny Eaton decided to bring it to the stage and produce it, and so it took me in that direction. Yeah. So I have not been able to really dedicate the time to the story that I began saying I want to write this story for my daughter and for my family. Because when you begin to take classes, and writing a novel is so different from playwriting, you find out things that you didn't know, right?
Oh, 100%.
So when you get into that arena, there's things that you have to learn, things that you have to understand about writing. And playwriting and writing a novel are
I think that's why prompt writing was really helpful with the exercises, because you start off with the prompt. It can take you somewhere else, but then ending that short essay with that prompt and tying it together, it can be challenging, and especially when it's on that deadline timer, because when I do write, I set a timer. Sometimes 10 minutes, sometimes 20 minutes, sometimes 2 hours, whatever, but I will set that timer and I'll give myself that 5-minute warning. And when it goes off, I'm like, I got to wrap it up, and it's like, okay, let's wrap it up now. And then I can go back to clean it up. But, it's like, okay, I got to tie back that fence from the beginning into the end of the story, because, why was this fence introduced?
Yeah. So, one thing that somebody might say, well, why, am I a writer? Should I be writing?
Everyone's a writer.
One of the things that I found was that when I would sit at the computer to write, I would start, sometimes if time allowed, I would sit and, maybe start at 5, 6, or 7, depending on that morning. Yeah. Yes. And all of a sudden I look up and it's like 1 or 2, and I forgot to eat. I'm like, so you get so engulfed and so caught up that was one of the things that I realized, well, maybe this is something that's a calling for me, because if I didn't, if I wasn't
track of time, and you're so passionate about it.
Yes, and also having that determination to see it through, to say, no, I need to really bring this to its end. With
Angel's Journey, I think I told this, like, I sat down for 9 hours and never left my computer, not to eat, not to pee, nothing.
Yes, I
just kept going and going, and I did type that. And then when I was done, I was like, what did I just do? Like, I sat here all this time. I mean, no interruptions. Like,
wow.
you know, for things like that to happen, like the phone didn't ring, nobody
Right.
came to the door. I mean, this is pre-children. So, you know, it was like I had all this uninterrupted time.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
and I was telling a story about a girl who had passed away. And she had wanted to reassure her mother she was okay. And I remember walking away from it going, why did I just write that? Like, questioning myself, you know, with the why did I write that? What just came out of me? And what is the message for me in there? Because, of course, I want to turn it around and, you know, get something out of it. Yeah. And I just remember, you know, needing to take a shower after. I was like, okay, I'm going to take a shower. And in the shower, just thinking, okay, I get it. You passed away. You're an angel. And I was like, I just wrote An Angel's Journey. And I literally walked out of the shower and I'm like, oh my God, that's the name of the book.
Wow.
You know, like when you get that inspiration of, I'm like, okay, that's it. No, you just know. Like looking at your child and naming your child, you know, sometimes you just know.
Yeah. Well, you know, and you got that in the shower because, you know, you get great ideas in the shower or when you go for a walk. But getting back to how I wrote Buried Beneath the Words, so I did embark on that journey to write Jordan City, but I remember just waking up one morning, and as I was walking out of my bedroom, I heard this little whisper that said, before you do that, it's so strange because, you know, I'm not, you know, hearing things or anything like that, but that was so clear that said, write a little book before you do that. Yeah. And I don't understand why. Yeah. But it was very clear. I heard that. And so I said, oh, write a little book. And at that time, I was not really thinking of writing as something serious. It was more, for me, something like, I just want to, you know, write Jordan City and give it to my family and say, look, this. And then when I wrote Buried Beneath the Words, then I think I started slowly to think about writing and taking it seriously.
What is it? It's a form of discernment. You
Yeah.
know? Like when we journalize, that's a form of discernment. So, And you sharing your discernment of being a writer in this book helps writers like me and someone, it doesn't even have to be a writer, someone to discover what they're supposed to be doing in life.
Well, you know, what this book allowed me to do, Buried Beneath the Words, was in that book, I really talk about how words are so powerful because, you know, Buried Beneath the Words, I felt as, you know, as I was growing up and into adulthood, feeling that I was defining myself by words that other people used about me, right? And it's like,
we do that all the time.
And having to come out from under that. Wait a minute, this is what how this person perceived me, or these are the words that I heard, you know, and it was a time to really think about that and put it into, you know, like you say, journaling, put it down and really look at it like, wow, this is how I see myself, but is this real? Yeah. Or is this how somebody perceives me, but how do I perceive myself? And I remember...
Go ahead.
Yeah.
No,
you know, I remember that first chapter. I think writing that first chapter was really difficult because it was something that I remember the word stupid and putting on that word as a coat. And I remember that I described it as putting on a winter coat. My winter coat was that word. Whoa. And it was like, I need to take this off.
You need to get rid of that coat.
I need to get rid of this winter coat.
Yes.
Right. And that word was because of certain things that happened.
Gave it to you and you felt like you had to keep it.
Well, you know, somebody, you know, it's so easy when, you know, oh, you're so stupid. Why did you do that? Or something like that. But you don't realize how a person, when they're young, how they're going to take something like that and how it's going to affect them into their life. And maybe you're, you know, maybe thinking, I never thought of it, that you're wearing that word as a coat, as a definition of who you are. And then saying, wait a minute, that's not true. When did I begin to think that? Yeah. You know, why? And really looking at that and taking that off. And that's why it was really interesting because that came out of just a whisper like, oh, write a small little book, you know, and I wasn't really taking myself that seriously. as a writer at that time. I was more thinking, this is just fun.
And I've always enjoyed writing. I've always journalized. I've always written little poetry. I mean, I was in 7th grade trying to send things into Writer's Digest because I just thought, Reader's Digest.
Well, that's you, because you always, yes.
I was like, oh, I'll write a little story and send it in. You can get paid $50 for it. And, I would do those things. But then I remember distinctly being in high school in a English class and writing a story and getting it back with all these red ink on it. And I was so defeated because she didn't read my story. She was correcting my grammar.
I see.
And I was like, no one even cares what I'm writing. They just want to make sure I write it right.
Oh, okay.
And I'm like, but that's so just, when someone's telling you a story, when they're correcting you and saying, oh, you don't say it that way, you say it this way. You're like, just let me tell the story first, and then we'll work on polishing it. And it was... So that after that, I was like, well, I'm not going to share because that was a very personal story that I shared.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, forget it.
Wow.
So I kept journalizing and I just did my class like I needed to do it. And I really, now in my life, I look back thinking I shut down then as I'm going to share my thoughts because what does anyone care about my thoughts?
Wow, that's, yeah.
And so now, when my editors bring stuff back, I literally, my first thing is I say, does the story flow?
Does it make sense?
Does it make sense? Tell me if something is confusing or if I repeated it, and then go into the grammar stuff. Go into you misspelled this word or you need a comma here, and because if
those are the easier things to correct.
That's the easy thing to correct.
But
if you're criticizing someone's story right away, it's
Yes, right. And it's interesting that you say that because when I was in elementary school, I remember that there was a contest for everybody in the school to write a story, and I remember that my story actually won the contest.
Wow!
And my story won the contest, and I was completely blown away.
Yeah.
Completely blown away. And that only came back to me after I wrote Buried Beneath the Words. I thought, wait a minute, was that writing, was that something
Always
that was inside of me?
Yeah, it was inside you.
And that I never even realized until my daughter drew that picture. But then it brought me back to that contest that I won when I was in elementary school. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. And my story won, and it was printed in the teacher's handbook. And I thought, wow, maybe that's a gift that I had that I didn't even realize that I had,
No, definitely.
Yeah.
And, and now that you're talking, I'm thinking when I was writing this sort of fictional from the heart story that the teacher was, correcting the grammar on, at the same time, I was writing speeches. I was class president. I was making up cheers for the cheerleading team. And that was welcomed. You know what I mean? That was and maybe because I was being truly, I don't know if it's, I don't want to use the word truly authentic, but it's when you're giving a speech to your class, trying to encourage them or, whatever it is, it does come from the heart. When you're telling this fictional story, you're using a little bit more of your imagination, but it was still it felt like it wasn't acceptable to write fiction. And even writing April Rain, I struggled with because it's fiction. And your stories, they're not, everything's kind of sometimes based off of something we know in our life.
Right, yeah.
But it's the fictional world. Jordan City is a fictional world of this purple building.
Yeah.
But inside, beneath her words, she's taking them from someone. She's saying, oh, there's this person who lives in this apartment, and who does that person remind you of? Oh, it reminds me of my neighbor down the street or something like that.
I think it's so important too to somebody that, for example, when you wrote that story, that to really, like you say, see the story, right? See the potential. Yeah. And that is where it's so important because you shut down.
Yeah.
Because she was, correcting grammar when you're like, well, does the story, what do you think about the story?
Is the story okay?
What about the story? Because correcting grammar, that is, but, I'm thinking too, in teacher, maybe, they're trying to teach you about grammar and.
Yes, no, and I get it was an English class.
Right. But still, you wanted validation about the story, right? And so I think it's so important. I remember when I wrote that Buried Beneath the Words, Valerie Utton, and she was so encouraging through that process because I was taking writing more like a hobby, something just like,
Fun.
oh, I'll just write
enjoyable.
a little,
Yes.
to share with my family. But she was, again, so encouraging. Having the right people, not that they're just going to be like, oh yeah, everything you do is great.
Right.
They're going to tell you,
Yes.
they're going to tell you, no, this is, this doesn't make sense, or you need to really think a little bit more about this, but also to understand where the writer is. Okay,
in
like
their journey of writing.
in their journey of writing, and understanding the person. Okay, is this when, I need to give that person some encouragement?
Yes.
And then, okay, now let's get. And I think, I think being sensitive to that is important to writers who are just starting out.
Yeah, I mean,
because if not, a person can just
someone
give
who
up.
has that idea in their head, someone who's listening to the show, they're gonna be like, okay, I really need to write that story, but there's the fear and anxiety of what people will think about that story, and then of course you have that critical girl or boy who lives inside you who's like
already
but putting the pen to paper, sometimes just getting it out and then you reading it with your eyes so that it's not just in your head, you start to see it develop in a different way.
Right, exactly.
So yeah, no, this has been really, I mean, you and I could talk for hours about a lot of things. And, I do thank you. You had shared with me the script for Tight Pants, when you're doing it, and I got to use that a little bit as a model for helping me write April Rain, and taking my head out of, like, directing the camera or directing the actor on what to say, like, and just sticking to the dialogue.
Sticking to the story.
If you stick to the story and the characters tell the story in dialogue, everything else gets pulled together.
Yeah, right.
So that was very helpful. So what do you have going on now?
Well, right now,
are you working on a new book? Are you? I don't know.
Okay. Well, right now I'm working on the building.
Okay.
It's having a stage reading at the Silverthorne Theater Company there in Greenfield.
Okay.
And the reading is going to be at the Divine Theater in Holyoke.
Okay.
So I just came back last night from the first reading rehearsal.
Wow.
So that was interesting because, when you're in your room writing the story and then the actors bring life to it, then you can see what works, where maybe a little tweaking is called, it's necessary, or the parts that you love, or you get to see it brought to life. So right now I'm working on the building.
Nice.
And after the building, I think I'm going to tackle
the Purple Building, Jordan City.
Jordan City, and then I also started writing this short story called "A Good for Nothing Woman."
Oh. And
I am really excited about that story.
Nice. Well, we'll have to have you back on to talk about that for sure. Yes. Well, I want to thank the audience for tuning in today to yWrite. It's always a pleasure to have a listening audience interested in the conversations that we have here on the show. We want to thank Studio 954 for giving us the availability to bring this to you, and our sponsor, Rafer Pellegrino. The law offices of Rafer Pellegrino. He's not just your average car accident lawyer, because he and his team support you to get the best outcome possible so you can get on with your life. Remember, you're looking for a good lawyer, call Rafer Pellegrino. Rafer for the win. And finally, I want to thank Betel. Thank Betel Arnold, the author of Buried Beneath the Words, The Building, Tight Pants, and all these wonderful plays. You can see more of her bio, which will be on our website at yWriteNow.com. And until next week, I'm going to leave you with our writing prompt. We do something every show where I give you a little bit of a writing prompt so that you can pick up your pen and start writing, because that's what we're about. Why do you want to write? You want to write because you have something to say. So if you want to take your pen out and write for the next 10 minutes, put a little timer on, that will be great. I do have a little prompt for you today, so you can start with this prompt. And this is a really interesting one, because I want you to try and write it in a dialogue. So you're going to have a dialogue with someone, and you're going to think about a time where you had the courage, you needed the courage to speak up and say something differently. So when was that time? And do it now on paper. So have the courage, stand up, and write.